I never thought I would be the kind of woman who kept secrets not in her phone or beneath her clothes or in hotel rooms, but inside her mind where they fester quietly and undetected, wearing familiar faces and warm voices, disguising themselves as conversation and empathy and harmless laughter shared across a dinner table where my husband used to sit beside me and now simply sits near me, where I once felt like a woman and now mostly feel like furniture, like something reliable but invisible. And I know that sounds dramatic and selfish and ungrateful, because I have a house and a life and a name that still matters to someone, I suppose. But somewhere between morning alarms and silent breakfasts and nodding across rooms and checking if we still have laundry detergent, I lost something I can't name, and maybe that's why it started so quietly with him. Just my husband's friend, just someone who dropped by now and then, someone whose presence never once registered as anything more than familiar background noise. A person I'd known through stories and shared events and polite jokes made after 2 glasses of wine at our anniversary dinners, and I don't know exactly when it changed. But I remember the moment I realized it had, which I think is worse. Because that means I let it grow, let it happen, and I was aware of it in the way someone is. Aware they are walking too close to the edge of a cliff, but still pretends they'll stop in time, and it wasn't because of something he said or did, not at first. It was the way he looked at me when I spoke, like he was really listening. Not just waiting for me to finish so he could speak. And that sounds so small, doesn't it? So silly and thin and meaningless, and yet it broke something in me because I hadn't been looked at like that in years, not even by the man I sleep beside, not even by my reflection in the mirror, and it wasn't romantic or sexual or even flattering. It was human, raw, real, and I don't remember what I was even saying. Something about a memory or a book or a weekend or a person we used to know, but he looked at me like I was the most interesting thing in the room. And it hit me then how starved I had become for connection, for attention that wasn't scheduled or obligated or tired. And I remember thinking, just for a second, that if someone could make me feel seen again, even just in words, I might let myself fall into that space, and I did. Slowly, guiltily, silently, because nothing happened and yet everything began. And I don't know if he knew. I don't know if he meant it or if he was just being kind, just being who he is. But I felt it, and it grew. And the next time he came by, it was like I was waiting for something I hadn't admitted I wanted. Some kind of confirmation that the loneliness I'd wrapped myself in wasn't entirely my fault, that maybe someone else saw it too. And we didn't talk about anything deep or meaningful that time, but I remember the silence between us feeling charged, and I started noticing patterns, like how my voice changed slightly when I talked to him, how I smiled differently, how I stood a little straighter, and I hated that I noticed. Hated that I cared. But I also felt alive in a way I hadn't in so long that it frightened me, and I thought about it afterwards, too much, replayed the conversation in my head, tried to convince myself I was reading into things that weren't there, but deep down I knew, and the knowing didn't stop me, it pulled me in deeper, and the next few times he came over, I paid attention to everything, the way he asked about my work, the way he stayed just a little longer in the kitchen, the way he waited until my husband left the room before asking me how I'd really been. And it was the way he said it, the weight on the word really, like he knew no one else had asked me that in months, maybe years, and I wanted to answer him honestly, wanted to spill it all out, the boredom, the frustration, the aching loneliness. The way I felt like I was disappearing one responsibility at a time, but I didn't, because that would have been too real, too dangerous. So I just smiled and said, fine, and he didn't press me, but I think he knew I was lying, and that only made it worse, made me feel more exposed and more understood and more fragile, and I told myself I could handle it, that I was just being dramatic, that everyone has quiet friendships, emotional connections, that not everything means something. But I knew that wasn't true, not this time, and I started to feel things I wasn't ready for: anticipation, tension, warmth, guilt. And the worst part was that he wasn't doing anything wrong. Not really. He was just there, just present, just kind, just listening, and that made it impossible to justify and even harder to ignore, because how do you blame someone for simply seeing you? For making you feel like maybe, just maybe, you're still worth listening to. And the guilt came in waves, especially when I'd catch myself checking my phone for no reason, wondering if he'd texted even though he never had, hoping for it anyway. Or when I'd stand in front of the mirror before he came over and change my sweater twice for no reason I could admit, and I began noticing how quiet my marriage had become, how often we passed each other like shadows in the same room, how rarely my husband looked at me with curiosity anymore, and I tried not to compare, but the comparison was always there, unspoken, creeping in like a leak I couldn't patch, and the more I resisted the thoughts, the stronger they became. Not because I wanted to do anything, not because I planned to act, but because I had already begun to feel things I couldn't unfeel, and I kept telling myself it was just attention, just boredom, just temporary. But even as I said those things, I felt myself unraveling inside, bit by bit, and I didn't talk to anyone about it. Couldn't talk to anyone about it, not even in the abstract, because even saying it aloud would make it too real, too irreversible, and so I carried it in silence, smiled through it, cooked dinner through it, folded laundry through it, and waited for the next time he'd come over, for the next accidental moment, the next shared glance, the next harmless joke that would land just a little too softly. And I hated myself for how much I looked forward to it, how much I needed it, how much I let it matter, and the worst part is that I didn't know how to stop. I didn't want to stop. And that's when I realized I was already in too deep, not because of anything he did, but because of everything I let myself feel. And it's strange how something can become your entire world without you ever admitting it aloud, how a simple presence can evolve into a fixation that disguises itself as harmless conversation, as accidental comfort, as brief laughter over something no one else in your life would even notice. And I kept telling myself it was nothing, that he was just my husband's friend, just someone who cared. Someone who had the time and the curiosity and the emotional availability that no one else in my orbit had offered me in so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to be heard without agenda, to be listened to without being interrupted or corrected or dismissed. And at first it was just small things. Shared moments when he came by to drop something off and stayed longer than necessary, when he asked about how I was sleeping or what I was reading lately or whether I'd ever been to that new little place in town that made good tea. And I would answer simply and then think about our conversations later in bed, not because they were inappropriate, not because he said anything wrong, but because they stayed with me. They echoed in the quiet parts of the night where nothing else reached anymore. And I started noticing the way I felt when he was near, the way my body relaxed and my mind woke up, the way I stopped checking the clock when he spoke and didn't reach for my phone when he paused. And I don't know if he noticed too or if he was just being himself. But his attention became a drug I didn't know I was addicted to until I tried to go without it, and I started making excuses in my own mind for why it was okay, telling myself that everyone needs connection, that emotional loneliness is just as real as any other kind, and that I was only talking, only responding, only being kind, and even though I knew what I was doing, I still pretended not to know, because acknowledging it meant responsibility, and I wasn't ready to carry that weight. And then it started happening more. Small messages that weren't necessary, that didn't need to be sent, but were. A thank you here, a hope your week's going okay there, and I could have ignored them, could have replied politely and closed the door on whatever was growing between us. But I didn't, because I liked it, because I looked forward to it, because every time I heard from him it reminded me that I still existed in someone's thoughts. And I began checking my phone at night with a little flicker of hope, deleting messages before I could even fully admit to myself why, saving his name under something neutral, turning off preview notifications. All the things people do when they're hiding something, even if they claim nothing's happening, and still I kept insisting to myself that it was innocent, that I wasn't doing anything wrong, and I believed it until I didn't. Until the night he sent a message that simply read, "I don't know why, but I feel like I talk more honestly with you than with anyone else," and my stomach flipped, not with butterflies, but with guilt, because I knew what that meant. I knew what it opened, and I should have ended it there. Should have said something firm, should have put a boundary in place, but I didn't. I just stared at the words for a long time, and then typed, "I understand," and when he replied, "I knew you would," I felt everything slide into place. Not like a fall, but like a choice I had already made a long time ago without realizing it, and after that it got worse or better, depending on how you define it. The messages became longer, softer, filled with tiny vulnerabilities that no one else had access to, and the way he spoke to me made me feel like I was the center of something again, not the edge, and I started replying in ways I didn't intend. Letting my words linger, offering pieces of myself I hadn't shared with anyone in years, and I knew what this was becoming, and still I didn't stop. And when he told me that he thought about our conversations during the day, when he admitted he felt calmer around me than around most people, when he said, "It's strange how easy it is to talk to you," I felt something bloom inside me that I had kept buried for so long I forgot it was still capable of growing. And the danger wasn't in what we said, but in what we didn't. The danger was in the pauses, in the time between messages, in the ache I felt when I didn't hear from him, in the rush of relief when I did, and my husband started noticing things, little things. The way I'd smile at my phone and then hide it, the way I was quieter some evenings, the way I seemed distracted. And he asked once if everything was okay, and I lied, said I was just tired, just busy, just overwhelmed. And he accepted that answer like he always does, and that made it worse somehow, because it reminded me how easy it had become to lie, how deep the distance between us had grown, and I tried to stop. I really did. I told myself I'd put an end to it, that I'd let it fade, but I missed him, not in the way people talk about missing someone they love, but in the way you miss water when you're thirsty, in the way you miss light when you've been walking in shadow for too long. And every time I tried to stay away, I'd break in some small moment. A quiet afternoon, a sleepless night, a bad conversation with my husband. And I'd reach out again, and he'd always answer, always listen, always offer that soft presence that I had come to rely on more than I ever admitted. And I hated how much I needed it, how much I looked forward to it. And I hated even more that I couldn't imagine letting it go. And the worst part is that I started to feel like it wasn't wrong anymore, started to rewrite the rules in my own head, started to believe that maybe this is just what happens when someone forgets how to love you and someone else remembers how. And every day I slipped further into that logic, further into that space where morality gets quieter and emotion gets louder. And the more we spoke, the more I saw myself through his words. Not the wife or the mother or the woman who always does what's right, but someone softer, someone wounded, someone he wanted to understand. And being understood felt more dangerous than being touched, because it opened everything. It invited the parts of me I thought I had locked away forever, and I knew this was going to cost me something. I just didn't know how much yet, and I wasn't ready to find out. So I kept going, kept replying, kept hiding, kept needing. And I don't know where This ends, I don't know what version of myself is waiting at the edge of this cliff, but I know she won't be the same as the woman I was before he started looking at me like I mattered. And I don't know exactly when I crossed the final line. Maybe it wasn't a single moment. Maybe it was 1,000 tiny ones strung together like a necklace of mistakes I kept fastening tighter and tighter around my own throat. But I know that by the time I realized there was no going back, I had already stepped so far into the silence that even the sound of my own guilt had become familiar, almost comforting in its constancy, like an old song you hate, but still hum without thinking. And the messages had become more than just conversation, more than just words. They had become a parallel life. A place where I existed fully in ways I no longer did inside my real one, a version of me that felt younger and older at the same time, alive and broken all at once. And there was a night. I remember the exact color of the sky, the particular stillness of the air, the way the kitchen light flickered just slightly. When I stood there holding my phone in my hand, staring at his message that simply said, "I wish I was with you right now," and I felt everything tilt. Felt the walls of the life I had built with so much care and compromise begin to shudder under the weight of a truth I couldn't keep denying, and I knew what he meant. Knew it wasn't about anything physical. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But something had broken open between us. Something raw and real and wrong, and I should have said nothing, should have closed the phone, should have let the silence answer for me, but I didn't. I answered. I told him I wished the same, and in doing so I gave a piece of myself away that I will never be able to get back, no matter how many times I pretend otherwise. And the days after that were different, heavier, laden with things unsaid but deeply understood. Every glance, every word, every silence between us carrying the unbearable weight of what we both knew we had let happen, and I thought I could handle it, thought I could compartmentalize it, thought I could live two lives without one devouring the other, but I was wrong, and the cracks began to show in places I couldn't hide. In the distracted way I answered my husband's questions. In the way I flinched when my daughter mentioned his name casually over coffee. In the way my hands shook sometimes when I thought too much about what I had allowed to grow inside me, and the fear of being found out was constant, a thick pulse behind every breath. And yet the fear of losing him, of losing what little light his presence offered, was somehow worse, and I hated myself for needing it, hated myself for prioritizing it even in the smallest ways, hated myself for choosing again and again, day after day, moment after moment, to keep the connection alive, because by now it wasn't something I could explain away. It wasn't innocent. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate and desperate, and I was just as guilty as he was, maybe more so. Because I knew better, because I had more to lose, because I had sworn things to people I loved and broken those vows not with my body, but with my heart. And sometimes I would look at my husband across the table and feel this unbearable chasm open between us, filled with all the things I would never tell him, and the shame would rise so thick in my throat I could barely speak. And other times I would wonder if he even noticed, if he even cared, if the man who once knew every contour of my heart would recognize how far I had drifted. And the answer, unspoken and heavy, was always no, and that hurt too, in a different way, in a way that made the betrayal feel less like a sin and more like a tragic inevitability, like the slow crumbling of a house no one bothers to repair. And then came the worst night, the night that sits in my memory like a wound that never heals, the night we met in a place that wasn't ours, but became ours for a fleeting, terrible hour. And no, there was no touch, no kiss, no moment that could be caught on camera or confessed in a single sentence, but there was everything else. The look in his eyes, the way we sat too close, the way we spoke in half-formed sentences because the full truth was too dangerous, The way my hands trembled in my lap, and his voice cracked when he said my name, just my name. Like it meant something more than it ever should have. And it was in that moment that I realized we had crossed into a territory where even silence was a betrayal, and I knew I had to end it, knew there was no way forward that didn't destroy everything, and still. When we said goodbye, when he walked away, I wanted to call him back, wanted to reach out and clutch at the air between us like I could stop the inevitable collapse of everything we had built in secret. And when I went home that night, when I lay beside my husband in the dark, I cried in silence, not for what had happened, but for what could never happen, not for the choices I had made, but for the choices I had lost. And the days that followed were a slow, excruciating unraveling, a quiet internal death I had to carry inside me while pretending everything was fine, pretending I hadn't shifted the axis of my own life beyond recognition. And he stopped messaging after that. Maybe because he knew, maybe because he was stronger than me, maybe because he realized that the only mercy left was silence, and I hated him for it and loved him for it and missed him so much some nights I thought my body might rip itself. Apart from the effort of pretending, and my husband never knew, never asked, never saw, and that, too, was a kind of grief. The realization that you can disappear right before someone's eyes and they will still look through you like you're made of smoke. And now I live in the aftermath, in the ruins of a life I still occupy but no longer believe in. And I smile and I nod and I cook dinners and I send polite texts and I attend family gatherings and I laugh when appropriate. But inside I am a hollow thing. A ghost of a woman who once thought she understood loyalty and trust and love. And sometimes I wonder if the woman I used to be ever really existed, or if she was always just waiting for the right loneliness to reveal what she truly was. And I don't know how long I can live like this, carrying a secret that no one will ever see but me, a guilt that no confession could ever cleanse, a love that wasn't really love, but something darker, needier, more desperate, and some nights, when the house is quiet and the world feels unbearably heavy, I let myself remember how it felt to be seen, to be heard, to be wanted, and I wonder if maybe that was the real sin all along, not the messages, not the meetings, not the secrets. But the hunger, the endless, aching hunger to be more than invisible, and there are no endings in this story. No lessons learned, no neat moral to tuck into my pocket and carry into tomorrow. There is only the living, the moving forward without truly moving on, the carrying of a weight no one else can see, but that presses down with every breath I take. And if I could go back, if I could undo it all, I don't even know if I would, because for a little while, for a few fleeting, forbidden moments, I was alive again, and that's the hardest part to forgive. The hardest part to forget, the part that haunts me most, that even knowing what it cost, a part of me would still reach for that feeling again if it ever returned.